includes people from a variety of political parties. Okay, so I'm pretty sure they're allowed to sit in there until they leave or die, right? Or carried out. Okay. And that's going to have its pros and cons. Like as they mentioned, if a new government comes in, they can't just replace the entire Senate. But part of the challenge is like, yeah, you might have people who are sitting there and are very comfy in their seat now and they're not really doing much, right? Or if they're very old and stale, they don't have new ideas, they don't really know what's going on, right? Someone's 45, 50, and their children are maybe, anywhere from 15 to 35, like maybe they have more knowledge of problems that are affecting younger Canadians, right? Okay.
I agree.
And please put my stuff down. Where you got it from. Thank you. Okay. So there's a number of seats from each of the provinces or regions of Canada, right? And they're trying to get a feel for what Canada wants. And the Senate serves to provide a sober second thought to any bill that's passing through, any type of law they're making. Non-money bills can be introduced by the Senate, but they must be sent to the House of Commons for further approval. The Senate cannot propose any laws that create or spend taxes. So these old people can't increase our taxes, right? Well, they're not all old. Although I think the average age is high for the Senate. The Senate can reject bills passed in the House of Commons, but rarely does. Okay. So a little bit of conversation on that. Many Canadians think the Senate should be abolished, which means removed, we shouldn't have a Senate. They disagree with having an unelected body in a democratic government. Right, so again, if we're a parliamentary democracy, but we don't get a say of who's in the Senate, then there's no democracy in that institution. Some people argue it's elitist, meaning that only certain people can ever be in the Senate, and they might represent a certain type of people. There's no unified consensus, so there's no one solid idea on what to do or how to improve things. A triple E plan was suggested, so they're elected by voters, and each province should have an equal number of Senate seats, making the body more effective. Part of the issue in Canada is that we're a very large country. Excuse me. We're a very large country and we're not very highly populated, right? So does anyone know the population of Canada, roughly?
5 million. Isn't it?
Canada.
30 million?
Yeah. 30. It's about 38 million.
Oh.
Okay. And so some of the maritime provinces have less than 1 or 2 million people. What's the population of Alberta, roughly?
Wasn't it 4 million?
It's close to 4 million, Alberta. Whereas the population of Toronto is almost 10 million, right? And Quebec, some of these cities, some of these provinces, and so it's very tough. How do you get an equal representation from each of the provinces, each of the areas of Canada, right? Because ideas don't have borders, right? If one idea infects a place, and that place has a lot of people, then a lot of people will believe that idea. Right? So that gets complicated, right? Because you don't want just Quebec and Toronto being the decision-making needle, right? What does Quebec and Toronto want? Oh, they want this. Well, Canada has to do that because they just have all this power, right? So that produces some challenges. We won't keep going on about that. We'll get through this. Judicial branch. So that is the court system essentially. Includes all level of courts, including the Supreme Court. It is separate from the other two branches, so it can act as a check on their powers, which means that the rule of law applies to everyone equally in Canada, and politicians cannot interfere with legal proceedings. Okay. They also interpret and apply the laws in Canada, including those that affect the rights of Canadians, which means it is responsible for making sure the rights of Canadians are protected. So they're basically making sure the government isn't overreaching itself, reducing or limiting your rights, right? Because in Canada, again, as I mentioned with our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, you have your rights and freedoms until a government or a court proves democratically that, no, we should restrict those rights and freedoms. So it's also up to the judicial branch to make sure that that's not getting taken advantage of. Supreme Court is the highest court in Canada and is the court of last resort for everyone, whether the case starts at the federal, provincial, territorial, civil, or criminal courts. So you can take whatever decision you have at like a municipal level, to a provincial level, and then to a Supreme Court level. Okay. The Supreme Court is appointed, and there are 9 judges from 4 regions of Canada. This prevents a tie during votes. Supreme Court judges can serve until the age of 75. Okay. The PM and cabinet nominate people who they think will make good Supreme Court judges, and after a review by an advisory committee of MPs, the Prime Minister selects one of the names from the shortlist created by the advisory committee. Okay. So again, it's a lot of the same political party will, bring up names, will offer suggestions, and then it's up to whoever's in charge to select a person. So do we feel like maybe some bias could be brought into these systems as well? Right, it's very possible, right? Okay, that wraps up that